Hi, Christina. How's everything?
Good. Hi, John.
Pretty good. So I'm here with Christina Noren, right?
Yeah.
It's a difficult last name. I could definitely read it as Noren, like some French accent.
Yeah, I mean, all American Norens really say Noren with the emphasis on the first syllable, and it's a Swedish name. So the few times I've been to Sweden, then they say Norén.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Okay, so that's how you start being involved with art. We'll talk about a little bit about technology later, but I want to hear how you got involved with art. And having said that, we are at Christina's place in downtown Los Angeles, and amazing. Like it's not a space, it's like an art gallery, right? It has more art than.
Yeah, well, I just moved here in August, so one of the things I've always been involved with art since I started drawing and making clothes and so forth when I was a preteen, and I've some of the things in the house, like that stand over there, I bought at auction when I was 16. I was the kind of 16-year-old that bought a piece of furniture at auction.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay. But when I moved here, I'd collected a lot of wonderful things, and I'd had a lot of custom stuff built for the house in San Francisco, and I eliminated everything that was boring, everything that I didn't just love looking at.
Nice.
And I've started acquiring more things I love looking at down here.
Ah, perfect.
Yeah.
So you were in San Francisco and you moved to Los Angeles. Let's talk a little bit about your first tech job. Was it in San Francisco?
No, it was actually in Marin County. So I went to school at it's now styled Dominican University. It was Dominican College. It's actually the oldest private liberal arts college in California, on the West Coast even. And I studied fine art and I studied business. And I went very young, so I was 14 when I went to college. Mm-hmm. And when I graduated at 18, I meant to go to fashion school in Europe. I had started a fashion business when I was 16. That was my first business.
Entrepreneur at 16, okay, I like it.
But I needed money, and I was living in a loft making art in San Francisco. And so my accounting professor found me a job at Sonic Solutions, which had offices in San Rafael, and then moved to Novato. So I was commuting up to Marin County.
Wow.
So I was like not in Silicon Valley. Like, that's the funny thing about it. It's like I was in tech, but I was at the opposite end. This was the Lucasfilm spinoff. Oh, yeah. It was the audio counterpart to Pixar. So we had a lot of ex-Pixar people as well. But, I fell in love with the people. We were talking earlier as we were getting ready for this about the sort of axis between music engineers and software engineers.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the people that were on that edge. Like, one of the people that worked at Sonic when I worked there in 1993, he ran our hardware engineering, was Paul Alyoshin, who became the first hardware engineer for the iPod. He's passed away since. But those were the kinds of people that I met. And I asked myself, did I want to spend my life around the fashion people that I was meeting, or around those musician, engineers, mathematicians? Who did I like better? So I made my choice.
Of course.
Yeah.
And so your first tech company that you joined, like hardcore tech, was...
Sonic Solutions. So I joined there in 1993. We went public, I think it was still 94, it might have been 95. I took an accounting job.
So that's the important thing. Like I have a lot of friends that they want to obviously get involved in the tech business, but they're like, you know what? I was an artist, or I'm an accountant. Like, how can I be part of a tech company? And I'm like, what do you think? Like, all tech companies have engineers writing code all day long. Definitely you can squeeze in, and maybe you can...
Yeah, and it's funny. There was a point at which I thought that I was part of the last generation that could just come in through the back door, because computer science wasn't a major, for many years before I went to college, and so most of us were self-taught in some way, and then it seemed like. I also feel like this whole emphasis on girls in tech and getting people into STEM and yada yada is making it feel like you have to be super credentialed, particularly for women.
Of course, yeah.
So, I meet a lot more comfortable, confident, self-taught men in tech than women in tech, because we're always told, okay, you can be in, but you've got to do this one extra thing.
Yeah.
Jump through this one extra hoop.
Yeah.
And, I was too young and naive and unaware of the tech world when I started to get that message. And I was too far in by the time that message reached me.
So you think actually it's worse or better now? Do you have to jump?
Oh, I think it's
more?
worse. I think it's much worse.
Oh.
I think there's just a number of dimensions that have made it much worse for young girls in tech. So I'll speak out of turn a little bit and just say that our mutual former colleague Eric Swan, who's one of the most successful tech CTOs of the last 2 decades. And we worked together side by side for 7 years right before your company joined Splunk. He sent his daughter that he described as much more apt for tech to me when she was about 17 to talk about the experience of being a woman in tech because he was worried for her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. And what do you suggest? Like, let's say that a person wants to join a tech company but doesn't have the tech skills. Do you suggest that he or she should start reading on Coursera, join a university? What's your suggestion?
I think start doing practical things. I think my path was through the accounting job to sales ops to having to do my first proto CRM tools myself because they didn't exist using 4GL tools. So I would say take any job you can and then see what needs to get done. And go get it done.
Yeah,
so I'm not a big fan of the Coursera and all this sort of, I mean, maybe if that stuff had existed when I was young, it would have been helpful, but just start trying to do stuff.
Of course, yeah.
So my second job, I was hired as, in 1996 as a business development analyst for a company called Portal Software that is now still survives as Oracle's billing solution, telco billing solution. And that was another spectacular IPO. So the first 2 companies I joined went public around the time that I was at them or soon after. So that was a little bit of an unusual experience.
Of course, yeah.
But there, I joined as a business development analyst because where I'd ended up at Sonic was helping figure out once we'd gone public what other domains we could take our technology into. So I'd done a lot of market research just to pay the bills when I was in college. And so I developed that as a skill. So Portal needed some of the same things because it had gotten funded to be an ISP billing solution. Just when AOL went 1999 flat rate. So having a flexible rating engine was suddenly not very valuable in the original market. So we had to find other markets. That was what I was hired to do. But I'd gotten semi-technical at Sonic because in terms of that advice, I'd just done what needed to get done. A bunch of audio engineers did not want to build a CRM,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
They didn't want to build sales forecasting. So you figure out how to do it. And then when I got to Portal, we'd hired a lot of sales engineers, and these are basically roles, by the way. So I think operations roles, sales engineering roles, junior product management roles. These are doer, on the ground roles where you can learn technology and you can learn business. And you can form that bridge, and having other backgrounds like arts and humanities and economics and so forth. These are all valuable things to understand how the world works, which makes it possible to do these things well. But anyway, so back to when I got to Portal, I was sitting there in this weird business development analyst job in this 20-person company, and I was also fetching coffee, and the sales engineers that we hired out of these big, legacy telco companies turned out not to be that technical. And they turned out that they weren't that good at learning something new. And so they started bringing me along in the sales engineer role because I was going along to sort of partner business development type meetings. And I taught myself out of the manuals, out of, reading the Oracle manual. I taught myself Unix. I read everything I could. Then I became much more effective. So eventually they fired those sales engineers and put me in the job. And that took me to Microsoft.
Better salary, I assume. So they fired them and you got promoted.
Oh yeah, I went from $40,000 a year to $60,000 a year. So I was,
it
was pretty amazing.
Of course, yeah. So do you really believe, and I personally strongly believe that Silicon Valley, San Francisco / tech, and especially startups, are a world of meritocracy. Like, if you're really good and valuable for the company, you will be able to progress. Not only about the salary, but you will progress. You will be promoted.
Meritocracy is too strong.
So compared to entertainment, let's say to entertainment or finance.
Yeah, I mean, I only know those worlds from selling tech into them. So, I think in terms of meritocracy, I think who gets the chance to do stuff there is definitely a weird sort of, pattern. This is where the diversity issues come in. If you are a very young-looking girl like I was when I was 19, 20 years old and already a college graduate and had a baby face because of a Swedish Dutch background, you had to have the kind of sort of assertive personality that I've always had.
Yeah.
And other girls who would look like me would not get the same opportunities even if they had the same intellect.
And I don't think that's changed, by the way.
I think that's gotten worse.
Yeah.
So meritocracy is too strong. You remember Matt Green from Splunk?
Yeah.
So he coined the term duocracy there. And I think it is a duocracy, and I think that's my main message here. Mm-hmm. But you have to reach out and you have to be assertive about putting yourself in a position to do.
Of course, yeah.
And a lot of us are not raised to do that.
Yeah. I mentioned meritocracy mostly because I have friends working in the entertainment business or the finance business, and even if they are trying and they are struggling, they cannot not only get promoted, they are no one. Yeah. Where in the tech world, if you are an engineer, maybe your company doesn't like you, they don't love you, they don't promote you, whatever, but you have more chances. You could say, okay, guys, that's it.
But engineers, I'm not an engineer.
Of course.
I've made my life on the edges between business and technology, and I'm much more hands-on technical than most non-engineers.
Which is even better, because you ended up not on the engineering side, you ended up on the managerial side, which is 10 times much better.
Yeah, but I'm very aware of my limitations there. But it is much more political. Mm-hmm. So, so you end up, if you're the youngest executive at a political company like Splunk, where we both were, and you're the only female, it's a very political position to
that's why it's fun.
Yourself in.
That's why it's fun.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Some days it's fun.
Yeah, that's true.
Some days you just want to come home and move furniture around.
And then you went to Microsoft, right?
Yeah, so it was Sonic for 3 years. It was Portal for a couple years, and then at Microsoft, and I was at MSN. So I was one of the first members of the breakaway MSN operations team when Microsoft was trying to figure out how to be a service provider and not a shipping on CD software company. Oh, yeah. So that was another place. It's like that's part of what's worked for me in my career is going places where there aren't any pros because it's brand new ground. Yeah. And where also, I haven't really thought about this, but the commonality between Sonic and MSN and Portal is I went somewhere where the qualified technical people's interests were not at all the gap of the thing that needed to be done. So there was a vacuum where you could jump in and learn and make mistakes because no one really wanted to do the thing you were doing.
Yeah. Any interesting stories from the MSN era?
Lots of interesting stories.
Because that was a huge pivotal point for Microsoft. They were trying to move from CDs to be a provider, a platform, and what have you.
Well, I think I might have told this story on a different podcast, so I apologize for redundancy, but it's one of the ones most relevant to my current halftime commitment at CloudBees with being in the DevOps world and around release engineering and so forth. So I think I had like a dozen jobs in the 2 years I was at MSN because everything was changing and I don't know how many bosses I had. And I was just always like put into like, okay, there's this weird thing that needs to get figured out. And so we were having a lot of problems with the release process for new software updates to MSN properties. And so they wanted somebody to organize that process. But we had all this expertise in Microsoft. I mean, we'd been releasing software for 20-something years. We knew everything about releasing software, didn't we?
Yeah, of course.
So they sent me up to Bothell, Washington, to meet with the guru of Microsoft release process. And her manual that was about this thick, I remember the manual, on the really ugly conference table.
Wow.
And what we were going to do is we were going to go through the entire process line by line that resulted in Microsoft CDs ending up at Egghead, and we were going to edit it into an online release process.
Fantastic. Sounds very interesting. Yeah, very agile process.
When really our problem was that our engineers were used to booking their vacation the day after they dropped their code.
Oh, okay.
So it was going to go on CD.
Perfect.
Right. So it's just stuff like that. And it's funny because those, that's also where I got into the log management stuff that brought me to Splunk. So, my biggest job at Microsoft was running the data center monitoring team for MSN, where we did a centralized log database. And I got the funding for it by telling executives it was going to give them dashboards. And the actual motivation was to get engineers off production boxes to look at logs. Oh. And so, anyways, I was going somewhere with that. This is the part where we get into the those kinds of experiences were they set the foundation that and the release engineering for what became the significant middle of my career. And I had no idea, because I was stumbling around in the dark, we all were. And I had no idea that these were actually business problems that we could build multi-billion-dollar companies on the back of.
So you were inside these companies, you were seeing some problems, some patterns.
Yeah, but it was like there were three companies in the world that had those problems in that day. Day, it was like 4 maybe: AOL, Yahoo, CompuServe, us, maybe a handful of others. And we had no idea that an HSBC would have the same problems. Maybe there was sort of an instinct that these felt like, they felt arcane and weird, and but I think there was an instinct that these are the things that are kind of getting in the way of us doing the thing we're trying to do that seems more interesting. Mm-hmm. And I always have had an instinct, I think, for what are the facilitating, what are the things behind the scenes that are facilitating, because those are the common problems. And if you solve those problems, you're not in a hits business.
Of course, yeah. And one thing I've learned from startups is that startups that have a huge impact and they disrupt sectors and segments are the startups where you don't really understand what problem they are solving yet. What I'm saying is that sometimes in order to have the most returns or to disrupt the most, you need to act on having only the 20% of the knowledge. The moment you have 80% of the knowledge, everybody's onto it. So
this is actually one of my problems with the current climate around startups. That it's like there's. I hate to say it, I call it millennial product management, but it's this sort of experimentation. This is like, you can't have an opinion. I was at a company that my current company, CloudBees, is a customer of, and I'm very proud of the products we built. But Interana had a slogan of data greater than opinion. Mm-hmm. Bullshit, utter bullshit. And it's something where it makes people feel safe to not have to go out on a limb, not have to go out and have an opinion. And, I'm interested in being data informed, but data driven is bullshit, because without framing, data is meaningless. Data is not information without framing, without a hypothesis.
Yeah.
And so, I think the great startups are where there's instinct that drives a hypothesis that may be spectacularly wrong. But if you move fast on that, yes, you want to learn quickly, but I think also people mistake early signals. So I was having a conversation with a company that shall go nameless earlier today. Mm-hmm. And they stopped doing something on decision after a year of trying it, and it didn't work. And to me, the trying it was clearly, one very obstinate approach to execution that was not core to the idea. So, in Splunk, where we both were, so was the wiki page still there of all the people, including me, who'd been in charge of Splunk base that were no longer at the company?
I don't know. Maybe I think it was when I left. The page was still there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you got there about a year after my 7 years ended there.
Yeah.
But so Splunk Base was like something. It was just like this idea of a cursed project, like the idea that having an online adjunct to a piece of software was foolish, and anybody who picked it up within the company was kind of laughed at. But that's the heart of how a lot of software works these days. Like tethered software to SaaS services is an enterprise software standard. And it wasn't me, but early Splunk people that were there even before me had that vision. Michael and Patrick had that vision, and it wasn't, and Eric had that vision, but it wasn't ludicrous. But we didn't know how to do it. So yes, of course, we did it too early. The first ideas of what features would work, but there was an instinct that tethering on-premise software to a SaaS service that provided some kind of aggregate data value that was continuous. I mean, the other things that worked that way back then were antivirus companies.
So you don't believe the motto in data we trust? Because I remember New Relic had huge billboards like in data we trust.
And in Your Honor, we had data greater than opinion, and I pick fights over, as many people who watch this will know, I pick fights over data driven versus data informed all the time. I love, I think the ability to analyze data at scale and, is so very interesting. Actually, so here's another interesting tie. So Art Forum, the magazine, around 2014, so there's actually been two really mainstream or non-techie magazines that have done brilliant, earth-changing articles on data in the last while. So I can't remember, it was probably 2011 or so that The Economist endorsed the term when it became big data, which we all thought was a stupid term, and we still do. But when that made the Economist cover in 2010, 2011, it's like, okay. I mean, I remember coming into the Splunk conference room and someone throwing it on the on the table, and it's like, okay, we're made now, and we're right.
Yeah.
But then the Art Forum did an amazing article, and it was probably 2014. That was really about what big data meant to art and architecture. So indulge with me for a second. We're going to get to the subject of this table in a minute. So one of the things that they were informing the art world about was that the ability to analyze all data points meant that the aesthetic idea that things that were computerized were hard-edged and geometric was actually the result of an earlier phase of low-fidelity data processing. And that curves and complex forms were actually the forms that corresponded to the big data era.
Oh, wow.
And so we're sitting at a very curvy table done by a wonderful artist named Adrian Segal that is a map of the Central Valley Water Aquifer in California. And the lines are based on actual computations of many, many, many data points. And they're wonderful, beautiful curves.
Yeah, of course.
So, so I think that's one of the things that that I think people miss, and I think that's where I think more of an artist approach that I bring mentally. I see the poetry of that, and seeing the poetry in data has been a lot of what's inspired me emotionally about this career in technology.
Nice. Yeah, it's the place where tech and art meets. I think now, especially with artificial intelligence, there are many people trying to use machine learning to create new art or try to find new ways where the human mind hasn't explored, I don't know, yet.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see some very interesting, new art, totally new art direction coming out from the machine.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. But I think it's also, get back to the aesthetics of it. The nuance of what we can compute and look at now, it's a very different aesthetic than the hard edge kind of, started with the Italian futurists, kind of mental model of what machine age art would look like.
Yeah.
And so, the technology has actually come full circle.
Of course. So you've seen, I am 100% sure you've seen the art where there was a banana that got sold with. What is the equivalent of Silicon Valley?
Oh, Lord. Well, I try not to pay attention to the kind of Silicon Valley startups that I think would be the equivalent of the banana.
It could be a New York startup, like WeWork. WeWork was like the definition of a banana, cucumber, I don't know.
Definitely.
Yeah,
It just makes me sigh.
And the interesting thing about WeWork is that it got funded by people in New York. The main investors were from New York, and everybody thought it was a Silicon Valley company. Like,
well,
I kept reading.
But I mean, it's the Massachusetts money, which is ultimately, and this is a whole other tangent, which is ultimately some of the dirtiest money in the world.
So you think that most VCs in Silicon Valley, they get their money, their assets from
indirect? I mean, it's all there's a lot of tributaries, and that's in that money stream. But there's a lot more ethical issues that we just don't like to look at. So
wherever there is a lot of money, usually there are ethical issues. Yeah, I don't think this is specifically for.
Of course. And the interesting thing about the banana is it's Maurizio Catalan, who's an artist who is expert at bringing those money-oriented ethical issues to the forefront.
I know. I remember he did a toilet.
The gold toilet.
That got stolen, actually.
It got stolen, supposedly. It may be a hoax, like the Banksy hoax.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
So you left San Francisco and you came to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, I was one of those San Franciscans who thought LA was shallow with no culture, and I knew New York. I spent a lot more time in New York than Southern California growing up in mostly around San Francisco. And I had contempt. I don't like celebrity. I don't watch movies. So what business would I have in Los Angeles, right?
Mm-hmm.
What started to happen was I spent more and more time down here. I had a number of people close to me. I started going to a hiking retreat in Malibu, the Ranch Malibu, and that was and then I would take extra time and explore Los Angeles. And this started happening about 7-8 years ago. And so I got to know more of LA. And then I started to see people that I considered very advanced artistically and intellectually making real considered choices to be here. Some people that I've been very close to for decades. And so I started to open my mind somewhat. And at the same time, so I had a lovely house that I remodeled in North Beach in San Francisco, which is very much home neighborhood for me. I thought I was never going to leave it. But I saw the city around me eroding. Columbus Avenue is it's a ghost town, and as my contractor who's retired since, but he was a sculptor trained at the Philadelphia School of Art, I think. Also someone very art sensitive in San Francisco who's since moved to Palm Springs, and he called it the gray washing of San Francisco. And I started to look around, and truly all of these beautiful buildings were turning gray, and it was symbolic. And I wasn't excited about anything new. And I would sit at restaurants and listen to the most inane conversations by
fundraising startups.
And it would be like 23-year-old know-it-alls that think they have the exact formula to make the companies that I've been lucky enough to be part of building. And if I would end up talking to them directly, they would tell me how it was done. And I was just bored and irritated out of my mind. And that's not how I felt. When I come down here, I feel, for a snarky person, I feel optimistic and sunny, and it's my mood lifts when I speak to people in all walks of life down here. And here in downtown, it is all walks of life, every block. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's, it's good to have contact with people in lots of different lives on an everyday basis. And then I was working, I've since moved into just an advisory role, just to have a little bit more freedom in my life. But I was running the product organization at a DevOps company, probably the leading DevOps company, CloudBees, and I was managing hundreds of people in 17 countries, none of whom were in San Francisco. One of my direct reports was in Orange County. But, I was on conference calls with East Coast and Europe, and that's the other thing I think that's happening. And as you think about, a name for this series of conversations and why I would resist Silicon Beach and so forth as a name for him, I think really, I think the most interesting software innovation is happening in companies, both small and large like ours, that are totally distributed. Where, I had engineers who worked from the beach in Spain and had grown up in Germany.
Same here. Yeah, most of my companies have been distributed. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you sold your company in Greece to a Silicon Valley company.
Yeah. The interesting thing about decentralized companies is that some companies, I think the majority of the companies, that they cannot accept that people are happier when they work from their home or from a co-working space. They don't want to go to the office. Like smart people, they don't really want to go to the office. I think that the companies that they cannot do that is because they don't trust their people. They literally think, you're going to stay at home, you're going to watch Netflix, you're not going to work. Like, man, you're paying me to be like, because I'm the best. Like, I'm not going to spend my time like watching Netflix. If I wanted to watch Netflix, I would go and work somewhere. I don't know.
I was commuting before I went to CloudBees, I was commuting from San Francisco to Redwood City at a company that had a CEO switch, and the CEO suddenly wanted us to be nearly full-time in the office, which wasn't the deal.
Oh.
And I had, my choices were an hour and a half each way drive, or 2 hours of Caltrain each day, each way, each day.
And Caltrain, we both know it's like hit or miss. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work.
Oh, by the way, another thing on San Francisco versus LA. So people ask about the traffic. The nice thing about LA is you always have a surface street alternative.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, but commuting from San Francisco to Redwood City to Palo Alto to whatever, you are stuck. If you've chosen 101, you're stuck.
Yeah,
if you've chosen 280, you're stuck.
Yeah.
And I don't like feeling stuck.
Of course. Yeah. So you moved, you went to Splunk pretty early, right? 2000?
It was 2005, so I was employee 12.
Before the IPO?
Oh, yeah. No, I was before launch.
And how was it? How was it back then? Was it, I assume it was way more crazy than when I joined.
How much do I want to share?
As much as you feel comfortable without getting us a lawsuit. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was tough. There were a lot of wonderful ingredients and a lot that was inspiring, or I wouldn't have been there for 7 years. And a lot of what I liked about that early Splunk culture, I've tried successfully or unsuccessfully to bring other places, sometimes to people's annoyance. But I'll be frank, it frustrates me to see Splunk making a lot of latter day kumbaya stuff about diversity and inclusion, given the battles that I've had to fight for myself and my team on that front, and the battles that I feel guilty to this day for not having fought because I felt too vulnerable. I was 30 years old when I joined Splunk as a VP.
Super early, yeah. And you were employee number 12, you said? And you left...
I left right after the IPO, so I was there for 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah, but what I will say is, so again, Splunk was wonderful and awful sometimes as well. But I'll put the wonderful part was that Godfrey threw me with lots of people's help. Matt and Will and others helped with this. They threw me a 7-year anniversary / going away / what was it, my 38th birthday party. And they rented out an art gallery, and they threw a wonderful bash after I decided to leave after the IPO. And Will Hayes and others brought me a signed physical copy of the 1.0 Splunk MRD that I'd written that everybody had mocked, because writing a spec was something to be mocked by engineers. And everybody had signed it, and that was just so sweet. And they bought me shoes at Barney's. And it was like, there's always humor like that. That was a saving grace, I think, of Splunk, was sometimes the humor could be really hurtful, but sometimes the humor just lit everything up.
Yeah. I remember that Splunk for me was like joining, being the fifth person of Metallica. They were these crazy guys building great software, and it was all this energy, all this passion. And we're like, this is awesome. Like how?
Well, speaking of Metallica, so another like fun early Splunk story was when we shipped 1.0 GAs. This must have been around, I don't know, November 2005 or so, something like that. I'll have to go back and check dates, so people fact check this. But Michael went. We had about 30 people in the company at that point. We'd been out of stealth for a while because we had a beta. And Metallica was playing across the street from the Splunk offices at, so Rolling Stones Metallica was the opening act, and I was much more excited about Metallica than Rolling Stones. But they were playing across the street at, I guess it was now AT&T Park, I can't tell what they're called anymore, at the ballpark. And Michael sent Patrick to a scalper to pick up enough tickets for all of us the same day, and our partners. And that was the kind of thing that just like it was a spur of the moment. And this was not in the days of startups, having the kegerators and all the perks that startups have. This was just, genuinely out of their hearts. They wanted to have fun with the people who had shipped that product.
Now let's talk a little bit about startups and startups in Los Angeles. I remember that startups in San Francisco, I won't say they were in a better position in terms of funding, but they still are way more options. Like, as you said, you go to a coffee place, somebody sees you writing something on your laptop and might say, hey, this sounds really good. What are you building? I'm building this. Oh, I'm an angel investor. Here's my card. Or I work for RBC.
That was never my experience, unfortunately.
What? In Silicon Valley, never?
Well, so the two startups I've started myself are art tech platforms. And Silicon Valley investors and tech investors in general have never understood the art market. And they've never been open to me teaching them the art market because, I used to be very, very young when I was doing these, and then I had a track record as an enterprise software person. So another misperception of women in general and women in tech is that we can't be polymaths. So if I understand log data, I can't possibly understand art. So I really had a hell of a time getting funding, and I raised $3.7 million when I was 25 for Artloop. And lost it right after September 11th, 2001, which is another story. It was a hell of a time after exiting Splunk and having a track record where, yes, if I wanted to start the next, LogSplat startup, I could have walked into any VC and raised a ton of money, but I wanted to do something else.
And the art, raising money for an art company.
So it's that, and then the log management companies that I've been involved with early on fundraising, it hasn't been easy. So Michael was a brilliant fundraiser and the founding CEO of Splunk. And one of the smartest things he did was raise Series B early. But Splunk was started in a recession. Splunk was started when money was not easy. The company before that I was employee 10 at, that did end up selling to AT&T. There was another log management company called Adamark and then Sensage. We took hundreds of meetings to get Series A. I joined there after folding my startup and losing all my money from previous IPOs, and the company had $10,000 in the bank and was nearly bankrupt, but it was $10,000 more than I had. I convinced a friend of mine at Atom Shockwave, which was a spinoff of Macromedia, to finally, actually license our product on the day we had a meeting with one of the VC firms, and we actually managed to get them to invest because we finally had a paying customer. And Series A back then was more like seed rounds are now. So things have shifted. But it was hell to raise money for those companies as well. And this is a company that founded what's now a multi-billion-dollar space.
Do you believe that it would help if somebody was from Stanford, for example? Because I know that if you are not one of
Yeah,
these
so I think
single-
so I think that's also my issue with your meritocracy comment earlier,
yeah.
right? So yeah, I know a lot of people out of the Stanford and MIT and CMU mafias. I don't have that kind of pedigree personally. I haven't been part of companies early on that have that pedigree. But my friends who have that pedigree, yes, I observe, and you never tell from the outside, but I observe that they seem to have a lot easier time, raising that money.
If somebody wanted to move to Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and start a company, would you suggest, you know what, it's better to go to Stanford, drop Stanford, so you have the badge that I'm a Stanford dropout, and then start a company?
Why move to Silicon Valley to start a company today?
Ah, nice. Where would you go? Would it be Los Angeles? Would it be New York?
Where do you want to live? So I'm not in Los Angeles because of the tech community here. I do like that a more creative edge of the tech community and the art world are here. That's emotionally and culturally why I'm here.
And consumer products.
Yeah, I don't care much for consumer products. So it just does. I mean, and I don't consider the art startups I've done they're not consumer products, but that's another discussion. But I'm here because that is the energy I want to be around. So I would encourage people to find the place in the world that has people around you that inspire you the most, that you want to spend your life around, and then start your company from there.
The challenge there is sometimes it's difficult to do it in that space. So in that city.
So at CloudBees, we have developed a lot of relationships. So CloudBees, if people don't know, is a enterprise DevOps vendor that has about 50% of the Fortune 100 as customers. Has roughly 500 people. Is later stage. So we're a later stage, still pre-public company. We are a dominant vendor in the DevOps space, which for people like me who love DevOps, love back-end tools. So we've been building a lot of relationships with early stage startups, both to acquire them and to just build the ecosystem. So we acquired a company called Rollout.io recently. That was a small sub 10 person company out of Tel Aviv with one co-founder in San Francisco. We've built relationships with lots of companies. New Zealand has a thriving startup. So a lot of my family's in New Zealand. New Zealand has a thriving startup community, both in sort of IT, DevOps-y kinds of companies and other areas. In Australia, but all parts of the world. Like we have as a company, we have people in 17 countries. Our relationships are with startup entrepreneurs that are in many, many places. And they are making a go of it. So actually the New Zealand startup community in San Francisco is very thriving, and I've got a lot of relationships there. There's some great companies that are half in San Francisco, but their real home base is New Zealand. So I think you can do it, and you do have to travel to places where you're going to find investors or peers. And again, I think the successful ones that are not in what we think of as a tech hub are actually little mini tech hubs. Like Dunedin, New Zealand, has a thriving tech community.
Yeah, I had no idea. Yeah. And I am relieved that you're saying that, because at least my stance was like, if you want to raise money or you want to create a B2B product or a technological product, you have to be in San Francisco. At least you have to be there to see what's happening.
Like when I was doing my early art startups, I flew to New York 40 times in a year. It's like, you have to do that. I was literally like every week back and forth. There are those concentrations, but I think you don't have to fly as much these days. You can do more remotely, but you do have to be present long enough to build relationships and build real humans. So I think that's the thing about all this remote work. You do have to take the time to be in the same room and build human relationships. But you can now do that by if you are an entrepreneur in Auckland, New Zealand, you can fly to San Francisco twice in a year, meet some people that can connect you to, to the right network of VCs, take some meetings, use the scarcity of your time actually as a forcing function, which I've seen people do very successfully.
I agree. Yeah.
You probably have had an experience like
course.
that in yourself,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So just, I think almost it's a downside if you are just sitting there, at a cafe on,
waiting,
at Sight Glass on
Yeah.
7th Street, taking meetings, every day for, for weeks or months. You look desperate.
Yeah, that's true. So are you planning to start a new company?
I don't have explicit plans right now. Right now, my plans are to keep doing more of what I've been doing, which is helping companies of various pre-public sizes and, various formal and informal advisory roles. The core idea between the art tech platforms that I've started, I still think my thinking is shown to be more and more valuable. Sorry, I wouldn't say valuable, but more and more directionally correct. I think that there is a big business to be built to people that's hiding in plain sight in that art space, and I do think I'm the right person to build that. But I also know what it takes to build a company.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And and one of the mistakes that I think I made in previous times is just because I was suddenly available from one of my back end software things ending, I felt I have this Dutch work ethic. I have to jump right into the next thing, and it wasn't always the right time. I didn't take the time to meet and involve the right people, to make sure that biggest mistake I made as a founder is not making sure that I was fully, deeply aligned with my co-founders.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Because I wanted to talk a little bit about single founders or two founders. I know that companies with one founder.
3 is ideal.
Yeah.
And I never had the patience to find 2 people that, if my co-founders are listening, I'm not impugning you. It's my fault, not them. Like I didn't take the time to make sure that I was founding a company with people who had the same core insight, the same or enough alignment of motivation.
Of course, yeah.
And frankly, were at the same position in their lives, in their where they were, what affected their day-to-day work, their financial position. Don't co-found a company with someone in a dramatically different financial position than you are.
Of course, yeah. That's super important, yeah.
Either direction.
Yeah, of course.
And I screwed that up twice. I screwed it up at 25. I screwed it up at 40.
Yeah. And it's very important because you might think, hey, this guy has a lot of money, so okay, he would be able to secure funding or whatever. I've never seen that happening.
No.
It might happen if the guy is like a multi-billionaire or whatever, but generally it doesn't happen. Like you have to be, as you said, in the same finance.
Well, and in the art space, that is really the only space I would start my own company, because I've learned that in enterprise software, I'm a really good employee 10 through 200. And I'm proud of being able to be a right-hand person to the kinds of CEOs and founders that are good at starting those companies. But for me to start my own company would be back in the art space. And the art space, because it's become increasingly image and celebrity driven, attracts a lot of would-be co-founders who have questionable motivations, especially if they have money.
Yeah.
I don't want to start an art platform because I want to go to parties at Art Basel. It's part of the job to go to parties at Art Basel. They can be fun, but it's not why I start an art platform.
Yeah.
And like you and I are both investors in a company called Beautify Earth, which I appreciate you introducing me into, which is a street art startup in Santa Monica that I know share space with you. And I got involved because, I tested my hypotheses and I found that there was the right alignment of motivations of those 3 co-founders.
Yeah.
And they all had the right mix of art and business and just emotional attachment to why they were doing that particular thing. And they all mean to build a real business.
Exactly. Yeah, not a firework. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the only time I've been interested. So again, in fact, what I'm doing now is like it's for me, it's a life learning that it's better It's better to nurture, because what they're doing is not what I want to do in the art space personally, but I like what they're doing, and it lets me sort of nurture that and, help see how a startup plays out in that, in that broad space.
Yeah.
And, stay connected with that early stage of founding of companies. And it's better just to do that, and also, rekindle and, set up this house here with the art collection I had, and expanding the art collection, and, meeting galleries and artists down here. And, if my platforms are supposed to get people to learn to engage with art in a comfortable way and grow that ecosystem, I have to reconnect with why I'm part of that myself.
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit about CTOs, because I don't know if you've been to any of the meetups in Santa Monica about startups. They're hilarious. You should definitely go. Totally different than the Silicon Valley or San Francisco meetups. They are more fun, but I would say like the startups are not as technical, obviously, as they are in San Francisco, which definitely it's not a bad thing. Like, it's refreshing seeing that actually people have ideas that could make money, like instead of having a product that 10 people in San Francisco will use. So it's nice. But one thing that I found is most of these founders, they don't know how to attract or find a CTO, because there are not so many engineers willing to start their own business, at least down here in Los Angeles. Do you have any suggestions? I've heard, for example, from one friend of mine, like, all founders should know how to write code. And I'm like, come on, man, that doesn't work. Like, okay, all founders should know how to do financials. All founders have to know. This doesn't work. Like, you need somebody to actually write the code and manage the team.
Well, I think you do need to do. I do think you need to know a few of those things.
A few, but not write the code.
You don't need to actually write the code.
Of course, yeah.
But,
have an idea,
Sonic Solutions, that first company that I worked at in 1993, had a lawyer as a CEO who'd been an executive at Lucasfilm, but he did learn how to write a few lines of code.
That's impressive.
Doris, and and there's probably still a couple of those lines surviving the successor product. So I think you have to get your hands dirty, but you also have to know that you are not an engineer just because you learned how to use a compiler.
Yeah,
right?
of course, yeah.
And so I think that's one of the issues is that respect for each of the different roles that people play. I don't know that I have a good answer for that, because again, in that sort of patience to get the right founding team. I've never found a technical co-founder that was the right technical co-founder. The closest I came was I hired an amazing woman as our back-end engineer, but I'd already made a bad hire as a front-end engineer for the last art tech startup. Mm-hmm. And when I do get involved, I think it's different. Like, when the two halves of my world, like the DevOpsy, very technical back-end startups, this is never a question, because usually the co-founder is a CTO.
Of course, yeah,
right? Or is gonna put their energy into learning to be a good CTO.
Yeah. I'm talking.
And
mostly,
then for the art startups, I haven't figured it out. So it's one of the flaws.
It is difficult. Yeah.
So I have a SlideShare that's been up for about 4 years or so on my LinkedIn, called "Why Tech is Misfiring for Art," and it was my snarky, about to leave that world again, take on all the things that are misconceptions that engineers and tech people have about art, and art people have about tech. But in a way, it's kind of like the struggles I had with trying to get people to build the right tech for that platform. So, I have had a lot of conversations with engineers justifying a take on what is necessary in terms of a data model for art, where they think it's incredibly arcane, and it actually is the essence of it. Yeah. But then you talk to art people, and they don't understand even the concept of having a data model for art, and every piece of technology they've interacted with is really a shitty product.
Yeah.
And they assume that that's the limitations. So I think it's really tough. I think you've asked a great question, and I wish I knew the answer. Yeah,
it's very difficult. Nobody knows the answers. Like, very difficult for somebody non-technical to acquire a technical person.
And and then vice versa. I think the one thing I would say is that I think we need more engineers who have enough other interests to understand the world a little bit more deeply and more life maturity. Because, they may be more open to learning the things they need to learn about the domain that they're coming into. So there's a wonderful gentleman down here named Rich Cherry, who was the assistant director here, I forget the exact title, but deputy director, I think, that launched the Broad Museum. But he used to be an IT guy at HSBC. And then he moved over and became the head of IT for various museums, and he eventually met Eli Broad, and he's a wonderful polymath, and he's working on 2 startup ideas himself. He was just one of my, one of the people that it was nice to reconnect with down here. But what he told me, which I thought was wonderful, so he's an IT guy, a tech guy, who really does get art deeply and has learned it deeply. And he had an interest from childhood, and he married somebody in the art world. But what he told me was, hey, when I was at HSBC in the 90s, I committed myself to learning banking, and I read banking magazines inside and out. And then he got a job, I think, at the Albright Knox Gallery, digitizing art, and he started reading Art Forum and all the art magazines, because it's like he felt that an IT career is a career in service, a technology career is a career in service of various domains. And it's incumbent on people doing that to learn as much of those domains, and become an insider. And that's ultimately a lot of what the sort of agile thinking is about. And I think one of the problems with why a lot of CTOs for consumer and other sort of non-enterprise DevOps companies are bad CTOs is they never really become insiders. So I would say that the next time I look for one, I'm going to find somebody who is committed to being an insider around art.
Very, very difficult. As you said, there are not many engineers.
But it's also the patience, and that's also that business of you have to do as I say, not as I've done, which is wait till you find those right co-founders that you really vibe with.
Yeah. Have you ever seen in San Francisco, I don't know, some engineers that were fed up of doing all the engineering and wanted to be involved in art, poetry, music, and they're like, okay, guys.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. Yeah.
Do you think that, at least my perception is that I keep seeing the last 2 years more and more people escaping and becoming the Silicon Valley refugees, like they escape Silicon Valley, they go to New York, they come down here, and they don't want to do engineering. They're like, hey,
I know a lot of ex-engineers, co-founders of companies with brand names we would recognize, who are fully committed to becoming poets, musicians, visual artists, novelists. And I think a lot of this sort of engineer mindset is you find people who say, okay, I'm going to take 2 years and I'm going to see what I can do in this other domain, and leave the option of coming back. And then I think you do find a lot of those engineers who, if they get financial freedom from engineering, then they decide to go sell their services, on the cheap to startups that are more passion projects or in areas that they really, have an affinity for, and they'll do that for a while.
Yeah. Interesting. Which is your favorite company right now? I'm pretty sure you have a favorite public company. Like some.
Well, so first off, you're going to get the answer I often give these questions, which is, I think I may have used one earlier in this conversation, but I generally say I don't do superlatives. So people will ask me, what's your favorite restaurant? What's your favorite food? What's your favorite artist? And my answer is, no one's ever asked me what's my favorite company.
See?
But my answer is still going to be the same to all of that, which is, I believe that the world has many dimensions and much nuance. Again, but what I love about the current generation of data analysis is we are not limited to a few dimensions anymore. So asking to boil down to favorite anything.
Yeah, when I'm saying favorite, I'm like, for example, I love Tesla because Elon is a crazy person, or I love, Twitter because I love the culture, or whatever, something like that.
I think there's a difference between having respect for the businesses, the founders, and the products. So it's unfashionable to say it, but I do love Twitter as a product. I love it in all of its warts. It's, it's a wonderful emotional release for somebody who's got a lot to say, in small bites. So, I enjoy it. And, it gets irritating when you find yourself on some, block list because, someone's blocking everybody of a particular political stripe or whatever. But, I like Twitter as a product, and everybody who complains about, it not innovating enough, frankly, when they innovate, they tend to, they tend to try to copy other people, and whenever they stay true to their roots, it's a simple and wonderful thing, and I hope that service lasts for a long time with all of its warts. And as a business, it's a shitty business.
Oh yeah. I didn't say tell me which company you love, like their business plan. Of course. Yeah.
So, there's a lot I like about you said public companies, but I'll just I love my main company, CloudBees. We're pre-public. But Sasha is an amazing, very deep thinking and very ethical entrepreneur who's also an incredibly smart business person. He had been the CTO of JBoss. And I think we're going to make a great public company someday. That is not a forward-looking statement. That's just an emotional reaction. I think there's a lot to like about Slack, and there's a lot of missteps that you can see from different sides. And I got to know the founders of Netlify. They're Danes in San Francisco, and I think that they have the ingredients of building a great company. I'm just sort of randomly just bringing up a few companies that I've enjoyed getting to know over the last few years.
Now the last question, and I will open the Pandora's box especially for this last question. Will you ever join a VC? If yes or no, why?
I probably not. I have flirted with options of becoming an operating partner. I'm not a financial person, so I did start in accounting, and most of the companies I've been at, I've had control of the financial plans at one point or another, just because of skill set. But I'm not I don't have a finance mindset. I have a product and business building mindset, which I think are very different. So with VCs, the operating partner roles where they're starting to have people that come from more of these backgrounds like mine, where I do have one board seat right now where it's fun sort of giving sort of multidimensional advice, and I'm finding that I think I'm having a good impact, and it's it's fulfilling. So doing that at scale would be the only way that I would join a VC. But I will tell you that the one recent conversation on that front was a non-starter because they wanted the person to be traveling 50% because they felt the need for them to be in person with their portfolio companies. And they wanted the person to spend a bunch of time in their home office in the first 3 months. And I don't really need that in my life anymore. Yeah. So I got a little dog down here that I call his name is Buzzy. I call him my career prophylactic because I have to say no to a lot of things that would be very dangerous to my emotional and physical health because I can't do that and keep my commitment to Buzzy.
Perfect. Thank you a lot, Christina. This was amazing. Thank you, guys. This is my camera. I keep looking here. I don't know. I keep looking both cameras. I don't know why. Thank you, guys. See you next time. Again, thank you a lot, Christina. This is an amazing place. Thank you for your experiences. And we'll talk again soon.
This was fun. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.